second show of our At Home with Cathy chalk paint series. We are adding more projects to what we started last year. We are going to add a couple of stools to our Swedish dining room. We have seating for 8 in there, but there seem to be 10 people most of the time, and I have these 2 tall stools which work. They're great as extra seats, but the dark wood is just too much in the room right now. The colors we chose for our Swedish dining room are on this chart. And one of them that was really attractive, to me anyway, was the Scandinavian Pink. And I thought, I wonder if I can paint something all pink. It's a beautiful color. It's kind of a rosy pink. It's not pink like Barbie doll pink. It's a beautiful, rich, old color. Kind of has a terracotta sort of feel. And I thought, I bet it would look great on these stools. So using this book, this is our Bible for this series, our second season of At Home with Cathy. I thought, I'm going to find a project in here that's very simple. Anybody can paint. If you can hold a brush, you can do this. And the one I found was on page 58. It is a simple dresser that's all done in one color. And I thought that would be perfect for these stools. Now, I'm not doing it in that color because that's not what I want in that room. I want Scandinavian Pink. So I did my little color swatch up, and I'm going to add this to our Scandinavian dining room by painting this stool. So we're going to start right away. I've washed the stool, which is the most important thing. This stool has been used many times, so it probably had some handprints on it or a little bit of maybe food on it, I don't know. But we want to make sure that it's clean. So I've filled a bowl with warm water and some dish detergent. I've washed it all down, I've rinsed it off, and I've let it dry. So it's ready to go. When I paint furniture like chairs or stools, I find the easiest way to start is upside down. This also helps you pick all the dog hair off the bottom, which in my house is an important thing. So I do that. I'm using the round brush because I want a nice all over kind of cross-hatched pattern, and I'm just going to start painting. I do the insides, the underneath. You paint fairly quickly. I don't have to be particularly careful by creating a smooth pattern or anything, smooth paint, because I want this kind of textured look to my paint. I'm going to give it a lot of pushing into the corners. It's going to take 2 coats to cover it. I can tell that already because the underneath the first coat, this is called this espresso chocolate. It's just going to be very dark with the paler pink. But I'm going to do all the insides that I can see. Then I'll go around to the other side. Just work around it. I like a table like this because I can just walk all the way around it and keep doing my paint. I keep going back to make sure that I don't have drips. I don't want drips as I'm painting along. But I timed myself the other day, and it takes me about 10 minutes to get a base coat, 10 to 12 minutes to get a base coat on something like a stool. I was kind of curious. I wondered if we could get that done in the video in a sort of a reasonable amount of time. So I'm going back, catching drips, making sure that I get where this is one of the parts that you tend to miss when you're doing it, is right here. You can see where the brace of the chair leg is. You tend to not see that sometimes. And as everything I paint, there seems to be a little added dog hair. Now, I don't need to do the underneath of the seat. You don't see it. I might paint a little bit just where it joins, but you don't need to paint under here. Over and do this side. Let's see how fast this goes. And you do not have to have any particular skill set to do this. This is a very simple painting job, painting technique. I love this color. It's a very warm pink. Almost a coral, but muted. A little more paint. And we're going to go up the legs. Make sure I get all of the little nooks and crannies. That's funny, as the paint dries, you can see the dark kind of comes through it a little bit more. So you can tell already that there will have to be a second coat. And almost done. You gotta check all those corners. And then I'll go back over it and just get sort of the worst. You see right in here, you can see where my brush sort of swiped some of the paint off when I was doing a side piece. So I'll go back and just kind of collect that paint, make it look a little bit tidier so I don't have a ridge of paint. All right, I think I have a base coat on everything. So now I use little wooden blocks to put the legs on. I find it kind of helps. Just tip it over. And there. Makes it a little bit easier. Your legs aren't going to stick to the cloth. I'll probably put paint right on that if I don't get it all the way. So now you can see, and I want to give that a little bit of a stir. You can see where I didn't get, which was the tops or anything I missed, and I'm just going to go along and get all of that, smooth out any paint drips that I have. Look for any ridges. Sometimes when you're painting down a leg, there'll be a ridge of paint where you went on one side. It's the brush is a little bit wider than the leg, so it carries some paint. And I just want to make sure I don't have that ridge. I can always sand it off if there's a little bit too much. So now I have the base of the chair done, or the base of the stool done, sorry. I'm just going to go around. Because I'm working so quickly, the paint's not having a chance to dry. I also like to paint in a room that doesn't have a whole lot of heat, because it will dry, especially in our Canadian winters when we have the furnaces going full blast or the heat pumps. It'll dry faster than I can clean it off, so or keep up with it, and I'll get these ridges and bumps. So I do like to paint. This room's a little bit cooler until the sun comes around in the afternoon, so that makes it a nice room to paint in. And I'll just go back over anything I see here that looks like it needs a little bit of attention. These the little buttons we put in to hide the screw holes. Sometimes you have to take your brush and just work back over them. You can see here there's just a little bit of a ridge where the paint didn't go in, so I'll just wiggle my brush over that a little bit. Okay, and then the last thing I do is the top. It's kind of like a reward. You've done all the tricky bits and you get to do just this nice smooth. Same as I showed you before when we were working on the filing cabinet for the coastal room. I always start in the middle and move the paint out. And I don't get a bump of paint on the end. would say that's our first coat of Scandinavian Pink on the, oops, little brush there. Oh. Just double check it. There, and we'll let that dry and come back and do the second coat. So we're back to get the second coat on the first stool. Again, I'm going to flip it upside down and start to paint using the Scandinavian Pink. And you'll see how much better the coverage is the second time around with the second coat of paint. And it really enhances, you get much more pink now. It's funny because as these paints dry, like all paint, the colors change. They start so light when I'm painting it, and by the time it's dry, it's kind of gone to more of a corally color. A little more pink than you see when it's wet. So this time I'm going to take just a little bit more time to make sure that I have really good coverage by going down each leg of the stool. On this stool I did paint underneath a little bit more and realized that the problem in doing that was when you try to turn it over, your fingers are in it. So the next stool I didn't paint quite as much underneath the top of it. You don't see the under the seat anyway, unless you're my granddaughter crawling around, and she probably doesn't really have an opinion on whether I've painted underneath the seat or not yet. So just nice smooth strokes. Not worried about seeing the brush strokes, that's kind of the fun part of this paint, but I just wanted to make sure that I have it all covered. Turn this around, see it a little bit better. And paying particular attention to where the little buttons are that cover the screws on that hold the stool together. I keep calling it a chair. So used to painting chairs, it's kind of a nice thing to paint a stool. There's no back. It seems to be so much faster to paint. The nice thing about doing a project like this is it really is quick. You could paint, I could have both of these stools painted, waxed, 2 coats of paint, coat of wax, probably 2 coats of wax on the seat just to give it a little bit more durability. But I could have these done in an afternoon and have them back in the dining room ready for use, which is sort of one of the real purposes behind this book of the 50 easy transformations for your house. The whole point is not everything has to be a complicated technique or take a whole lot of time. A little bit of paint, a good place to work. One day we'll tell you all the funny stories about what the animals did while we were trying to paint. I'm just going to go right up and down. And I'll turn it around again. So once again, painting everything while it's upside down. You can always see the hairs here. They add a little texture. So I said the first coat probably takes me about 10 or 12 minutes. The second coat I don't think takes maybe just a little bit longer, because I think you paint a little bit more carefully, making sure that you've got really good coverage and that all the dark of the wood, that the finish that was underneath is as well covered as you can get it to be. Sometimes when I'm starting with dark wood, and you'll see this in one of the projects we're going to do for one of the bedrooms, I will use the old ochre. It's a kind of a browny sort of beige color, and I find it's a really good blocker. So I'll use it as my base coat. I did it when we were doing the coastal room, when we were doing the chairs for in here, I did old ochre first underneath the cream because I found it really does block the dark colors. It's faster than, it's the type of pigment that's in the paint. Some paint colors have a lot of pigment that acts as a very good blocker and others don't. And so if you're trying to make something that started out quite dark, like this, the espresso on these chairs, or these stools, then sometimes you're better off to take the time to do kind of a primer coat. Block out that dark pigment, that dark color, and then you're not using so much time and paint with your lighter color. Although this pink has pretty strong pigment, so it is doing a good job of blocking. The other thing is sometimes you just can't tell till it's dry. It looks like it's well covered, and then you have to go back and just touch up a few places. So we're almost done here. Wooden blocks and finish it. Again, I do this just to keep it from sticking to the cloth. It's easier to paint around. We have one leg to finish here. By doing it upside down first, when you turn it this way up, you can see all the little places that you missed. Get the tops of each one of these bars. Clean up any little paint ridges. I do find my brushes shed just a little bit. I think that's from use and cleaning them. Just making sure that I have the tops of all of those little buttons painted. Okay, now we're ready to do the saddle or the seat. Sometimes I wish I had one of those turntables you use for cake decorating and I could just turn the whole thing around all the time. Now, it's always kind of like a reward to do the top part. Goes on so nice and smooth. So we're just going to do a nice coat on here. Nice coverage. Then we'll put this aside to dry. If I'm in a hurry, I usually have a floor fan going. It doesn't need heat to dry. It needs air moving over it to evaporate the water in the paint. That's how it dries. So if I want to get something done quickly, I'll just set a floor fan up and it will continue to evaporate the paint as I'm working on the next project, which is great when you're doing two stools because I can put this one to dry while I do the second coat on the first one. And by the time I've done that and maybe had a coffee, I'm ready to wax it. So let's put the brush down and wait for it to dry. So we have 2 coats of Scandinavian Pink on our stool, the first stool, and I can see a little bit of the dark coming through, but I think I'm okay with that, because what's going to happen with these stools, if they're like the rest of the furniture in the dining room, is people are really going to use them, which means they're going to get a little bit worn right here. They're going to get a little bit worn on the edge. So to protect that from happening too quickly and to stop the paint from looking all marked up, we're going to wax it. I'm going to use white wax on this. The rest of the chairs in this room have Paris gray on them. They're kind of a soft color, and I don't want this to be too strong a contrast. I want it to be a gentle contrast. We used Scandinavian Pink when I did the striping on top of the chair, so it's echoed in the room, and I just want it to be there as kind of a gentle reminder. And this is like the top of the peanut butter jar. This is a brand new can of white wax. This is very exciting to be able to dab in and have the first brushing. So I'm just going to brush some white wax on. White wax just has a little bit of pigment in it. It's clear with a little bit of pigment, and I'm going to put it on. Once your paint is dry, and you can tell it's dry when it has no shine anywhere, you can start waxing. Now, with some things, you have to wait until the paint is cured a little bit, because if I wax with too much pressure, I might actually pull the paint off because it hasn't really begun to cure. And by curing, I don't mean dry, I mean curing, which means the paint is setting up to be a hard finish. I'm just going to put a little bit on here. And with white wax, we let it sit for a little bit. Turn this around. See what I'm doing here. I want it to sit a little bit because I want that white pigment to actually be worked in to the paint. I want it to fill in where the brush strokes were. Good coat, and you'll be able to tell when you start to wipe it off whether you had it well waxed or not. Because if it's not well waxed, it will not look the same as the rest of the piece. You can tell it's a little bit of the pigment is picked up from the paint on the wax. There's mineral spirits in here, and to keep the wax from getting too hard, it's a beeswax base. And if it didn't have the mineral spirits in it, it would end up like a big block of wax, which you could melt and use, but would become a very tedious process. So everybody would probably not do that. All right, that's enough on there. So when I'm waxing the first coat, I don't wax the entire piece. I wax a good portion of it, and then I'm going to wipe it off and wax more. The reason is, if I waxed all the way around, this might start to set up more than I want it to. By the time I finish actually applying the wax over here, I would want it to be able to wipe off so that I can control how much wax is actually on here. So we're going to start with a whole pile of clean cloths, and the first thing I'm going to do is wipe off the excess wax. Just gently give it a little wipe off. Not wiping it all off. I just want to get rid of the excess. And you can see the pigment is coming off a little bit because the wax softens the paint. Now, the more I let this paint sit, the less wax would come off, or the less pigment would come off, sorry. Just wiping it all off. So that's my first cloth. That's the one that's taking most of the wax off. This is the excess wax. My second cloth is going to be my buffing cloth. And with this, I'm going to start to buff. And I'm not going to have much white on this. It's always a little bit of an experiment. I may go back and do a second coat so that I have a little bit more white on here. But what I am liking, the wax has pulled off a little bit of the paint on the outside edges. So I'm getting a little bit of a natural distressing just from the wax itself. It softens the paint and pulls it off just a little bit. I'm going to buff it a touch, and I'm getting a nice shine right here, which is always hard to see in the camera, but I'm getting a nice shine. I'm not getting any white, so I think what I'm going to do is go back, wax the whole thing, and leave it so that the white sits in a little bit more. And when you join me for the next show, we will start by showing you what this finished stool looks like. Hopefully the pair of them will be sitting side by side. So that's going to be the very first episode of our second season of At Home with Cathy. 2 tall stools painted in Scandinavian pink with white wax on them. And if the white wax doesn't stick, I might do a little white wash and then wax it. But you'll see that when you come back next week. So we invite you to come visit us at Absolutely Fabulous at Home. You can talk about anything you see on the shows. Shoot us an email, give us a call, come in for a visit. We love to see you, and we love to get you started on a chalk paint project of your own. Thanks for joining me.